I guess I'll kick it off. The first thing that we want to say to everybody is that we don't have any exposure to the Silicon Valley Bank scenario. I know we withdrew that fiat for salary purposes for the next few months, but we didn't deposit that into Silicon Valley Bank or anything. So there's no general concern there.
Nor do we have an account there, I think is the better way to say it.
Yeah. So just in case that was something that anybody was concerned about. Next, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping in terms of marketing. I know everybody's saying when marketing, but I know we've been pretty quiet from a marketing perspective, but we think it's important to note that we want to make sure that we build momentum with the right amount of runway leading up to the launch of V2, meaning that we don't really want to front load everything too early while development time is still happening, only for that attention and momentum to sort of die off before we're ready to launch. So we're just trying to make sure that we time it so that we capture as much attention with the appropriate amount of time leading up to launch so that we can kind of secure as much TVL as possible.
The purpose of marketing is to acquire users and to make the product succeed. So timing is important.
Yeah.
It's obviously annoying that we haven't been as communicative, but
right.
We still have to remain smart with when we call for attention.
But that being said, we are doing a lot of work internally right now to prep that campaign. And Dan and I are currently looking at integrating some platforms to try and reinvigorate not only the Discord, but social presence through things like bounties or quests with rewards, new roles, just things to get engagement up. And we're working on an overall marketing timeline for Medium articles, Twitter Spaces with various protocols that we've begun to engage with. Paul's prepping some hype videos, that sort of stuff. So I just want to say that we appreciate everyone hanging in there in the meantime. And we will start dripping some stuff out in the coming weeks, but in terms of like the full-fledged campaign, we're going to try to time that somewhere within like the range of a month leading up to the actual going to prod with the first V2 products. So that being said, unless Dan, you have anything else to add, or Paul for that matter.
I think the other thing is main objective with one of the main objectives with making updates to the Discord and like community experience is just making it a more fun and valuable place to be, on top of adding engagement. So I think we're pretty excited about what we've got planned so far, and excited about getting the community involved with some of these efforts.
Yeah. Cool.
Last thing that I would say is that this product is definitely like more consumer facing, which we mentioned in the past. So it should have a broader appeal. And when we do start deploying assets within the marketing campaign, this is something that is intended to be interesting to a wider subset of users. And so sharing it should be more fun maybe than sharing some of the stuff in the past, even though I think a lot of our content has been really fun. This one is going to be more directly, actionable to a wider group of people. So we're hoping that it gets shared far and wide when it's ready to go.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So who wants to take over next? Sharp, I don't know if you want to lead the next part of the call, but.
Yeah, sure thing. So we have disclosed recently the LMP, which is the current code name for liquidity management pools on Twitter. And the main addressable market here, it will be liquidity for LSD protocols. So the value proposition that we are trying to create within the V2 system, it relies on two different products. And the product that we're currently talking about, it's specifically the DAO-facing product. where LSD protocols will be able to, on demand and in a predictable manner, just access transparent rates and rent liquidity according to that rate in what we're calling right now liquidity order book. So I don't know, Bruno, if you want to cover the incentive models.
Yeah, I can go a little bit over this. So as Sharp mentioned, so it's basically, people should think of this as like basically two separate products that work together. So we have on one side, and I think we'll go into this into much more depth in the future in the on basically the LP side, right, for the general user base. But today I'm going to focus a little bit on the DAO facing product, which will allow them like a more deterministic rate as currently possible to, so to speak, like rent liquidity. And they will have like multiple options, so to speak, when interacting with the protocol to do so. So if you think of like an existing pool, let's say, for example, on Curve, right? And you want to attract additional liquidity for it via Tokemak, there will be like we have currently. So what I'm going to present is like more of a cartoon version of it. So a little bit simplified for this call in order to like not go into like too much granular detail here. But there will be multiple ways to set up these, let's call it liquidity campaigns. They will be able to choose, for example, to set the liquidity, so like define the amount of liquidity that they're seeking to receive from Tokemak. They will be able to set the incentives, so basically set the amount of incentives per period that they're willing to spend on liquidity, which then will lead to, obviously, depending on the rate, to like a varying amount of liquidity within that band of the rate that is moving. Or they could set the rate, right? So they could say, for example, if the current rate is 7%, they could say, I'm willing to bid, let's say, 200 of their reward token per cycle if the rate is, for example, at 7 or below, which could be then either below the current rate or above the current rate, right? Meaning you could say it's currently at 7%. I'm willing to buy liquidity, so to speak, as soon as it gets below the 7%. Or you could say, I'm willing to buy right now up to a rate of 8%. And then, of course, also like the ability to like stack these different methods of attracting liquidity. So you could, for example, say you're willing to pay going market rate going forward to, for example, attract like $2 million worth of liquidity with like the set liquidity method. And on top of that, you layer like an additional one that is like the set incentives rate, where you then have like on top of that, like a varying amount of liquidity. So yeah, these three are like kind of the three modes that they will be able to use. There's more detail to this, and it's all, I think, going back to that rate. It's this rate that this defined rate that will enable us to like basically give like some kind of like prediction of to behavior of these like different methods.
Yeah, but I would just add that within these three different models, at least to me, it helps me just to segregate both of them into two different categories. So when you define how much liquidity you want to get at the current market rate, or when you define the amount of incentives that you are willing to deposit per rebalancing, both of these modes are subject to the market rate, right? So this is a market price kind of option. So the other mode that Bruno mentioned, it's the mode where you define a bid and you say, for example, well, if the current market rate it's at 10% to rent liquidity through Tokemak's LMP, and if I am willing to start renting this liquidity at, for example, 7%, this means that within our pseudo liquidity order book, as soon as the market rate drops to 7% and below, this will be filled. And it's interesting because while you have protocols, for example, renting at the current market rates, you know where the bids are also placed in terms of liquidity demand. And that's really interesting. And we just realized that we're kind of creating a liquidity order book. That's the analogy that we're going for.
Yeah, and one last thing that I'm going to say is what I can tease a little bit. I've been working pretty closely in the last like week and a half with the UI UX team to like kind of get all these ideas. Our idea was just if I can say a little bit about this side of things. There's a lot of options out there currently to like interact with liquidity. All of them are like pretty complex or like have also offer different options. Our goal, like in terms of like UI UX, is to enable like the dream scenario is basically have a UI UX that allows people to understand what they're doing without having to like dig through a lot of documentation. For example, like what is an A factor, and then you have to dig through documentation to figure out how this works and how this behaves. So we're trying to like package this all up into like a great UI UX that has like a lot of like visuals, which I think currently look great. There's probably going to be a lot of change to that in the future as we continue building this. But what I can tease is that since they will be very helpful like in understanding kind of how these modes, for example, work, is that we might be able to share some of that UI with like some redacted parts in the near future, so people can have a look at what we've been building on the UI and UX side as well.
Another thing that is worth mentioning, it might not be intuitive. Like, why is on-demand liquidity valuable for LSD protocols, or honestly to all the other addressable markets that we're going to target? And the reason for LSD protocols, it's quite simple. So imagine that the exit queue for a given LSD protocol it becomes far too large, then you want to reinforce your on-demand liquidity. And as probably all of you are familiar with the gauge systems, if you are trying to rent more liquidity with a new gauging vote, you need to wait for the voting period to take place, and even after that occurs, what you are actually renting, it's rewards per incentives. And this is part of our core focus, is just to have a complementary system of liquidity that allows these DAOs to rent liquidity in real time, and again on a predictable manner, where they know upfront the costs and the rate that they are paying for their liquidity needs.
Okay, cool. Is there anything else that you guys feel comfortable talking about yet? Or maybe, Craig, you want to give us a little insight as to anything that was exciting about Denver, or any conversations, even if I don't know necessarily you can disclose some of the conversations that you had, but
This
May I
is
just add
all
something?
exciting. Go for it, Sharp.
I was just gonna add that. So GoNut, he told me that the devs are actively working on contracts for a few of the AMMs that we're going to support. And just by looking at the AMMs, the community can infer what this means. And they're working on contracts for Balancer Curve, Velodrome, and there is an additional one, which we're not sure if it will be integrated or not. But you can also infer what this means with regard to layer 2 deployments, which, as we said, it's a very big priority on our list. And unlike V1, V2 can scale without any of the guardrails that we previously used to actually constrain ourselves. So any TVL that comes from the isolated deployments on other layer 2s, it's just a value add in terms of more use cases for the protocol in a larger addressable market that goes beyond mainnet.
Yeah, so we should be in multiple ecosystems pretty quickly. That's the goal anyway. And the reason for that is because this problem to create liquidity is a real problem for really all DAOs with almost every asset, but in particular the LSD DAOs. And their one of their main visions is to have their staked ETH derivatives as units of account in DeFi, and that means having ubiquitous liquidity around all of these different ecosystems. So look out for that. Yeah, and lots of exciting stuff. I think this whole thing is exciting. We have DAOs with a really significant need. The models for creating liquidity today are broken. The bribing systems work to some degree, particularly for folks who dominate or are large influencers in those ecosystems. But there's still some things that are broken, and Sharp mentioned a lot of them. It's very hard for protocols to find a system they're happy with to generate liquidity. The pool twos are obviously totally broken. Those came and went. Now we have bribing systems, which are great in some ways because they enable a protocol to put $1 or 1 unit of value into these systems and get more than 1 unit out. So I think other folks on the team know exactly the outcomes, but just say you can put $1 in, you get $1.5 out for incentives. But while that's great, it doesn't really help protocols manage liquidity towards specific objectives and specifically reduce and manage costs for liquidity. And that's around a lot of what we're talking to these DAOs about in Tokemak V2 is to have this deterministic system with a clearly defined market rate that anybody can participate in. And ultimately, the market then finds an equilibrium for the cost to rent liquidity into the specific pools that it's going into. And that can be broadly applied through lots of different assets and lots of different dexes. And so to get to N's specific question, we're engaged with many, if not all, of the leading LSD protocols, met with a lot of them in Denver and some of the up and coming ones too. And we're working directly with them to understand their problems. So a lot of this, we're reflecting back to you, the community, things we've heard directly from people who are facing these problems. And a lot of those conversations continued in Denver and continue to validate this path that we're on. So we're really excited about that. We have, a lot to build. There are pieces of the system that we want to make sure we get right. And every time we have these conversations, we help move these relationships with one of the major target users of the system forward and continue to have these checkpoints that we're on the right path and building something that they're going to want to use. And I think all of that continued in Denver. Hope if anybody out there made it to Denver, just in general, lots of enthusiasm for the space and continues to be energizing. And I think the space continues to grow, and the stuff that we're building will really help the space grow along with it.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit, Craig, on what you mentioned with regard to the existing bribing solutions, it's interesting to see how they evolve over time. So, for example, during the huge demand for liquidity from the stablecoin rush, you could see that the ratio of rewards per incentives on Curve, it started to close the gap, right? So you went to a point where this ratio was converging to, let's say, $1 of rewards per $1 of incentives that are input into the system. So what this means is that as these market inefficiencies are essentially arbed out from the market, and you start to see more demand for liquidity in these platforms, such as, for example, Curve, and in the future also from Balancer, you start to see that this complementary solution that we are trying to present to the market, it's fully compatible with the current bribing markets, and they should maintain themselves at, let's say, full capacity, right? Because right now what we currently observe also with the LSD protocols is that one of the most interesting solutions for them is Balancer, for precisely the same reasons as Curve was attractive for stablecoins. So on Balancer, you can still rent incentives. I believe that from the last round, It was around $1.6 of rewards over each dollar of incentives. And with the balancer core pools, it becomes very, very attractive for protocols to set up their flagship pools directly on balancer. What we aim to add in addition to this, it's just the deterministic control over liquidity that is highly flexible and highly predictable in terms of upfront costs. And that's a very important distinction versus the current model where if you want to manage your liquidity across different AMMs, and if you want to do it based on incentives, you need to wait for time for those incentives to be enacted in the respective gauges. And in addition to that, you do not know exactly how capital efficient those incentives will be because you do not know if liquidity will follow those incentives to the given market rate. So that's really what we're trying to solve, a plug-and-play solution for liquidity so that in a given addressable market, players can have full control over their liquidity needs. And obviously, we have validated this with LSD DAOs. And I can also add that we're going to have a call next month with Swell, which is also an upcoming LSD protocol. So you're going to listen to us talking way more about liquidity needs with the first LMP. And also worth emphasizing that the first LMP is just one of the first addressable markets and will then expand to other liquidity markets that also need a market rate.
And one quick clarification there, a community call. So this one will be for everybody. We've been in communication with Swell.
Exactly. It will be a Twitter Spaces with them.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think part of that was sort of addressed to you, Tepicola. I know you asked that question about product market fit with the players and verticals that we're targeting. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that, Craig, in terms of Tepicola just said, have these players kind of seen the general structure of the idea that we're talking about here? And is that, particularly interesting or useful to them? And it sounds like for the most part, they are very interested.
Yeah, I think we can take even a further step back than this specific product. One of the benefits of having built Tokemak V1 and for a lot of the original team working in a centralized market maker in on-chain markets is that we've been working with different participants in the on-chain liquidity space for a long period of time. And while participating in those markets and while serving some of those constituents, I've gotten to understand where some of the pain points are and how they've evolved over time. And so I think we talked about this previously. We solved a lot of problems in Tokemak V1 with a really strong vision. And in our exercise of determining the right directions for Tokemak V2, already had a tremendous amount of sort of expertise and implicit and explicit sort of understanding of the different participants we wanted to serve. And so we started with a period of with a place of I think pretty robust knowledge, and then as we have continued to develop this model, have made sure that we've engaged with those same parties to make sure that we are on the right track. And we feel really good about the direction we're going. A lot of the things that you do here, you do hear from us are reflections of both our understanding and actual sort of words and language that have been communicated to us by these various teams. And I think you hear some excitement from us because the mechanisms that we're employing really in many ways were developed in collaboration with these groups because their needs and their pain points inspire the solutions that we're developing. And then when we reflect that back to them, they get more excited. So I do feel good that we're continuing to engage. This market moves very quickly, so we're going to continue to stay engaged. and the main goal is to find that, whether you call it product market fit or solving a real pain point, giving something to these constituents that makes their lives better, and they'll come to us because there's a real solution for them.
And in addition to everything that Greg said, it's also worth noting that, as we said, the Tokemak V2 system will be comprised, you can think about it as two different products, and the DAO demand for liquidity will obviously fluctuate over time. That's normal for us, that will be normal for bribing marketplaces, and it's just a matter of the current demand on the current market circumstances. Regardless, the other part of the system is also focused on still maintaining the protocol sustainable, even if this demand for liquidity fluctuates over time. So learning back also from V1, we understood that having addressable market that was exclusively focused on volatile liquidity and this interaction with these DAOs might not be the best approach. So we try to build a system that is more resilient, and regardless of these market conditions, it has a strong product market fit for every user that is engaged with the platform.
And I think it's kind of a fair question, although I don't know how explicit we can get. But Tepid also asked whether or not some of these players would be willing to support future marketing campaigns in conjunction with this product. And Craig, I'm not sure if there's anything we can say to that, but it sounds like probably there would
everything that I can say right now is that Twitter Spaces that we have scheduled, for example, for next month, it wasn't necessarily at our request, but we're going to do cross marketing, so that's definitely within our plans, and we're very excited to work with the various LSD protocols. And there's a lot of innovation of upcoming players that are still not established in the market, that are coming with new ideas, new verticals, and new solutions. So all of this diversity in terms of LSD issuers, it's a net positive for Tokemak, and we want to support each one of them as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think, look, this space is so small still, and we're all building together. And when we create products like this, it really is in conjunction with the other constituents. So we all want to help get the word out when the time is right, and certainly when people can start using this. Lots of opportunities for joint communications and support in a variety of ways. And those things have been discussed at a high level. They will happen almost assuredly if we're building something that's valuable to them. And more details to come, is more details to figure out, because we'll have a better framework to discuss specific tactical items, kind of as you mentioned, and at the beginning, we get closer to our own marketing campaign and awareness building.
I think we'll maybe take this one last question from Fox Wizard. Is our current timing related to the Shanghai upgrade? I would say not necessarily. I think it just more so has to do with our own internal development timeline, but maybe if Cody or Craig want to answer that question.
Cody, go for it.
Let's hear your voice, Cody. Speak to us.
Yeah, trying to get off mute. Yeah, it's definitely more on the internal timeline. I think before Shanghai or after Shanghai, our product generally works the exact same. So no rush to meet that deadline. We'd like to, of course, but it's definitely a timeline based on internal measures at this point.
Okay. Well, we're sorry. I guess Carson wasn't going to make it. I mean, he said he might be able to jump on right at the end, but we'll make sure that he's on the next one. Today ended up being a crazy day for him, I guess. But anything else? Anybody? Any last thoughts, as Craig always says on our daily calls?
I have one. One question actually for our own group. I know we've been looking at some data that indicates market activity around LSDs that might be interesting for the community to hear at a high level. One of the numbers that I think is really interesting, and it's not a direct parallel for Tokemak's solution, but if you kind of try and find some frameworks for determining how important liquidity is to DAOs in general, you can look at some of the bribing systems and bribing mechanisms that are in place. And this is one slice of this, so it's not representative of the whole thing. But thanks to our DGen Dan, who's been gathering and continuing to update data, looks like there's about $500,000 worth of bribes made per week on Hidden Hand for the last few months.
That's just an average for the last few months.
Yep. So I think one more checkbox that indicates if we're able to build a solution that people want, we're serving a market that has expressed they're willing to pay for something that's important to them. And I think that means good things for anybody who's continuing to solve those similar problems in a better way. Last thought, and that was it.
Sharpie, did you have something else to say?
No final remarks.
Okay, cool. You just unmuted, so I thought maybe. All right, well, I guess we'll wrap it up, but thanks for everybody for joining. And yeah, we got more to come. So we appreciate everyone's patience while we build this thing, and we're really excited for what's to come. So we hope that you guys will be too soon TM. All right, guys. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining Tokemak team.
Have a nice weekend, guys.
See you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, everyone.